At my brother's engagement party, my parents raised their glasses and said something that shattered me. They toasted to their only success. Everyone clapped while I sat there invisible. My chest burned, my smile froze, and I knew right then family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who don't betray you. I arrived at the engagement party thinking it would be simple. Just another weekend, another celebration, another occasion to watch my family parade their happiness while I drifted like a ghost in their periphery. The hall was enormous, its high ceilings reflecting the warm golden glow of chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. The scent of expensive flowers, lilies, roses, something faintly exotic I couldn't name, mingled with the faint aroma of roasting meat from the buffet. Everything looked perfect, almost painfully so. Like what you listen. Hit like spread the love by sharing and subscribe so you never miss an update. I tried to steady myself, taking a deep breath as I stepped past the rows of neatly arranged chairs and glistening tables. Each table was adorned with candlelit centerpieces, their flames flickering like tiny, deliberate beacons of attention that I would never have. My parents were already at the front, laughing, their eyes sparkling with that pride I had never been allowed to share. The way they carried themselves, as if the entire room belonged to them, made my chest tighten. I felt a knot of anticipation twist into anxiety because I knew exactly what was coming, even before the speeches started. My brother, dressed in a navy blue suit tailored to perfection, smiled with a practiced ease that always made him seem untouchable. He had that way of making people lean into him, listen to him, and forget the shadows he left behind for me. He waved at me casually, a small half smile, the kind that implied he knew I existed but didn't care to invite me into his orbit. I returned a muted nod, forcing a smile that felt alien on my face. It wasn't his fault, he didn't know any better, but that made it worse. The room grew quiet as my parents raised their glasses. That was the cue. All eyes pivoted toward them, and I felt my stomach clench. My father cleared his throat, and my mother's hand rested delicately on his arm, their smiles perfect in that way people practice in front of mirrors. To our only success, my father said, his voice firm, unwavering, as though etched in stone. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, then stretched, elongating, heavy with meaning, suffocating me. The applause came, warm, generous, unthinking, and I could feel every clap as if it were a blow aimed squarely at me. My chest burned, my lips froze in place. The smile that I had so carefully constructed cracked at the edges. I sat there, invisible. The room blurred at the edges, chandeliers melting into streaks of gold, the sound of laughter turning into distant static. The word only echoed in my skull, a reminder I had carried silently for years. The silence that followed inside me was deafening. My brother grinned, clinking glasses with his fiancée, blissfully unaware of the weight of those words on my shoulders. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout, to scream, to knock over a chair and demand that the world see me. But my voice was trapped, tangled up in memories, in years of being overshadowed, of being measured against a standard I could never reach. I told myself it didn't matter, that family wasn't always blood. But that thought felt hollow as I watched them toast to a future I wasn't allowed to inhabit. The engagement party moved forward like a meticulously choreographed play. People swirled around me, their laughter a soundtrack to my isolation. I drifted toward the buffet, picking at the edges of food I had no appetite for, watching my brother dance with his friends, his fiancée laughing at something he said, the room glowing around them like a bubble of warmth I couldn't touch. I could feel the eyes of distant relatives flicker toward me occasionally, a polite acknowledgement, a nod that said, yes, you exist, but never, yes, you belong. I wandered to a corner near the large glass windows that lined the hall, looking out at the city below. Lights flickered like fireflies in the night, and I thought about all the times I had tried to shine for my family and how it had never been enough. A memory rose unbidden. My high school graduation, when my name was read and my father barely glanced up from his drink. The disappointment in my mother's eyes was sharper than any rebuke they had ever delivered in words. I had smiled anyway, pretending that their indifference didn't matter. That skill, pretending indifference didn't hurt, had become second nature. I was pulled out of my reverie by the sound of laughter nearby. A group of my brother's friends had crowded around, telling stories I didn't recognize, jokes I couldn't relate to. One of them caught my eye and smiled warmly, a genuine, uncalculated smile. Hey, he said, his voice low so only I could hear. You okay over here? I nodded, unsure if my throat would cooperate if I tried to speak. He didn't push, just leaned back against the window, giving me space, but his presence was grounding, like an anchor in the middle of a storm. In that moment, I realized that family could exist outside the confines of blood, of shared history, of expectation. It could be someone who saw you, really saw you, when the world had long since stopped noticing. The evening continued, each moment layering over the last like brushstrokes in a painting I didn't belong in. Music swelled, conversations ebbed and flowed, and I drifted among the shadows, neither fully present nor fully absent. My parents' faces glowed with pride as my brother spoke about the future, about dreams and weddings and happiness, and I wondered how they could toast to success when they had left me stranded in the margins of their lives. And then it happened. I saw it in the subtle shift of my brother's fiancée, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes as she glanced at me across the room. Recognition, curiosity, perhaps even a hint of understanding. The sensation was strange, disarming, and I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. She moved toward me, weaving through the crowd with ease, and when she finally stopped, she smiled gently. You're quieter than I expected, she said softly. Her tone was not judgmental, not dismissive, but curious, inviting. I blinked, unsure how to respond, and words stuck in my throat. It's complicated, I managed finally, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. She nodded, understanding, not pressing further. Well, she said, glancing back toward the crowd, I just wanted to say hi. I think you might be someone worth knowing better. Something in her voice pierced the fog of shame and invisibility that had wrapped itself around me. I realized in that moment that life wasn't always about being recognized by the people you're born to. Sometimes it's about finding the ones who see you, who choose to acknowledge your existence even when the rest of the world turns away. I didn't know then that this brief interaction would unravel more than just the invisibility I felt tonight. It would become the thread that led me through a labyrinth of revelations about my family, about loyalty, about betrayal, and about the unexpected places where truth and comfort could be found. But for now, I watched my brother from across the room, my parents laughing at his jokes, and I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, one that belonged entirely to me. The night stretched on, and I drifted further into observation. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The way my mother's eyes flickered with a barely perceptible disappointment whenever she glanced at me, the slight tension in my father's jaw when my name was mentioned in passing, the way my brother's fiance's gaze lingered longer on me than it did on anyone else. Every detail was a revelation, a clue, a shard of truth I hadn't been willing to face before. And then came the toast, the formal one, the one everyone would remember. My father stood again, glass in hand, and cleared his throat. He spoke of pride, of success, of the future that my brother now represented. Everyone clapped. I sat, glass untouched, feeling the heat rise in my chest. My smile had returned, but it was brittle, sharp at the edges. I realized then that the pain of being unseen was something I could endure, something I could learn from. It was not the end of the story, only the beginning. After the toast, the room seemed to pulse with its own life, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Everyone moved in synchrony, a choreography I'd never been taught, and I drifted along the edges, careful to be invisible, careful not to intrude. But something about the evening had shifted. That brief interaction with my brother's fiancée lingered in my mind, a tiny ember in a dark room, and I couldn't shake it. I moved toward the balcony, seeking air, seeking distance from the laughter and clinking glasses that had begun to feel like a cage. The night outside was calm, the city lights stretching infinitely like constellations someone had poured onto the asphalt. I leaned against the railing, letting the chill brush my skin, and tried to steady my thoughts. My parents' words replayed endlessly in my mind. our only success. I could hear them as though they were carved into stone, unyielding, absolute. I thought about all the milestones I'd achieved quietly, the successes no one acknowledged, the scholarship I had earned despite their constant comparison, the late nights I spent building something that belonged entirely to me, the silent victories that had never warranted a toast. And yet, here I was, invisible in a room full of people who should have celebrated me. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "You're not supposed to be out here alone." I turned to see my brother's fiancée, her eyes reflecting the city lights. She didn't scold, didn't patronize. She just observed, and that was more than anyone in my family had ever done. I I needed some air, I said, my voice rough from disuse, from years of swallowing words that would never matter. She nodded, not pressing further, just standing beside me, a presence that was calm, grounding. "It must be strange," she said finally, her voice almost lost in the night breeze, "to be here and feel like you don't belong." I laughed, bitter, a sound that made my chest ache. "Strange doesn't begin to cover it," I said. "It's more like invisible." The word hung between us, heavy, unflinching. Her gaze lingered on me, searching, probing, and I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in years, someone saw the truth of my existence without judgment, without expectation. It was terrifying and freeing all at once. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes the people who claim to love you the most, Greco, are the ones who hurt you without even knowing it. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when the world tells them to leave." Her words were a mirror, reflecting truths I had buried long ago. I thought about my friends, the few who had stood by me when my family turned away, who celebrated my successes quietly without pomp, without a toast. They had become the family I never had, and I realized that night that perhaps I had been chasing recognition from the wrong people all along. I stayed on the balcony longer than I intended, letting the cool night air clear the fog in my mind. When I finally returned to the party, the energy inside had shifted. The music swelled, louder, more insistent, and my brother and his fiancée were dancing, surrounded by friends and family. My parents were off to the side, deep in conversation, oblivious to the world outside their own reflection. I found a seat at a table on the fringe where the light was softer and the clamor of celebration dimmer. I watched, listening, cataloging, noticing things I had never paid attention to before. My father's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass in another toast, a subtle twitch that no one else seemed to see. My mother's smile faltered for the briefest instant when my name was mentioned by an uncle, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. And my brother whose life was the measure of everything in that room, was quietly uneasy when a friend brought up a childhood memory I had long since erased from their collective history. Curiosity gnawed at me. I wanted to know what they thought of me, what they said when they believed I wasn't listening. And then, almost on impulse, I started to ask questions. Subtle ones, casual ones. Comments dropped in conversation that elicited responses revealing layers of tension I had never seen. It started with a cousin. "So I heard about your project at work," she said, leaning toward me, smiling politely. "Looks impressive. Dad said he didn't really understand it, but—" "Yeah?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "What exactly did he say?" She hesitated, a flicker of discomfort passing across her face. "Oh, nothing really. Just, that it wasn't what he expected. He always, he always compares." The words were a small hammer, striking at the walls I had built around my heart. I smiled tightly, nodding, and let the conversation slide, but the seed had been planted. My parents' pride, the success they celebrated, was conditional. It wasn't about me. It was about their image, their version of achievement. Everything I had done quietly, everything I had fought for, was invisible because it didn't fit their definition. As the night progressed, the layers of pretense began to unravel. I noticed subtle exchanges between my parents and my brother that suggested secrets I had never known, alliances I hadn't imagined. My father would glance at my mother, the flicker of recognition in his eyes barely perceptible, and I realized that There were things in this family that ran deeper than I'd understood: betrayals, unspoken deals, favoritism that had been carefully curated over decades, and somehow I had been excluded from it all, left in the shadows to bear witness without ever being invited to participate. By the time the cake was brought out, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The candlelight reflected off the icing, creating halos that seemed almost ethereal, and I could hear the chatter of the guests dim into the background. My brother's fiancée approached me again, this time with a small conspiratorial smile. You know, she said, leaning closer so no one else could hear, there are things in every family that aren't pretty: secrets, betrayals, things that make you feel invisible. But sometimes the truth is stranger than the stories we tell ourselves. Keep your eyes open tonight. You might see more than you expect. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I trusted her instinctively. That trust was rare, precious, and it felt like the first solid footing I had in a room that had always felt like quicksand. And then it happened. I saw it first as a shadow at the edge of the hall, a figure moving in ways that suggested stealth, deliberate movement, observation. At first, I thought it was a guest, someone who had wandered away from the crowd, but there was a familiarity in the posture, a rhythm to the steps that made my stomach tighten. My pulse quickened as I realized it was someone from my own family, someone who had been watching me for reasons I couldn't yet comprehend. I followed cautiously, my curiosity overpowering the lingering shame that had anchored me for so long. The figure moved toward a side door, one I had never noticed before, almost blending into the shadows. I hesitated, then stepped after them, careful not to draw attention. The door led to a narrow corridor, dimly lit, and the figure stopped at the end, glancing back. Recognition flickered across their face, a mixture of guilt and calculation. I realized with a shock that what I was witnessing was more than just secretive behavior. It was a glimpse into a side of my family that had been carefully hidden, a layer of deception and manipulation that I had never imagined. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper, but my words seemed to echo in the corridor. The figure froze, then turned slowly. It was my father. His face was a mask, controlled, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, fear perhaps, or the faintest hint of regret. "I didn't expect anyone to follow," he said finally, voice tight. "This isn't for you to see." But I had already seen enough. Enough to know that the night I had thought was simply about an engagement was about far more than celebration. Secrets, betrayals, and hidden alliances stretched beneath the polished surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And I knew, with an icy certainty, that I was about to witness the first of them. I stepped closer to my father, the dim corridor pressing in around us like a secret about to burst into the open. My chest throbbed, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to ask. The faint scent of expensive cologne clung to him, mixed with the tang of tension that seemed to radiate off his every movement. He shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the door behind him, toward the hall where laughter and music still floated in, oblivious to the storm gathering in the shadows. "This isn't for you," he repeated, his voice firmer, though the tremor at the edges betrayed him. "Go back, enjoy the party, pretend you belong." I laughed, bitter and low, a sound that startled even me. "Pretend I belong?" I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "You mean like all those years you pretended I mattered? Like all the milestones you ignored because I wasn't your success?" The words poured out of me before I could stop them, raw, jagged, and impossible to swallow back. He flinched, the mask of control slipping just for a fraction of a second. "You don't understand," he said, though I could see that he knew I did. "You've never understood." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I shot back. "I understand that everything I do, everything I've ever done, was never enough. I understand that your love comes with conditions, and that if I don't fit into your perfect little story, I'm invisible. I understand that tonight, at this party, I was nothing more than a shadow to you, a reminder of what you decided wasn't worthy of your attention." For a moment, he said nothing, His hands, normally so steady, twisted in front of him, fingers lacing and unlacing in a nervous dance. I realized then that he had never had to confront this, not fully. I had spent my life navigating the unspoken rules of this family, trying to earn recognition I would never get. And now, decades later, I was standing in the corridor, demanding it anyway. You don't know what you're talking about, he said finally, almost a whisper, though the words carried weight, as if he hoped repetition could make them true. I stepped closer, the distance between us charged with years of resentment and unspoken truths. No, I said. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've watched you toast to my brother as the only success. I've felt the sting of your indifference at every achievement, every effort I made to be seen. And I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt. He swallowed, then exhaled slowly, a long, deliberate release of breath that seemed to carry the weight of every hidden thought he had ever harbored. There are things you don't know, he said, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. Things about this family, about why I say what I say, why I do what I do. You think it's about favoritism, about ignoring you, but it's more complicated than that. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but unwilling to retreat. Complicated or convenient? I asked. It's always easier to hide behind complicated than to admit you failed as a parent. He flinched at the accusation, but I pressed on. Tell me. Tell me why I've been invisible, why nothing I've done has ever counted. Maybe if I understand, I can finally move past it. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as though seeing me for the first time in years. The corridor seemed to shrink around us, the hum of the party fading into silence. Finally, he spoke, slowly, each word deliberate. It's about perception, he said. You've always been different. Not in the way people celebrate, not in the way the world defines success. I thought, I thought I was protecting you, keeping you out of the spotlight that would have hurt you. I blinked. Hurt me? I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Protect me? By making me invisible, by making me feel worthless at every turn. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, and I realized that there was a shadow in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Fear, perhaps, or the weight of truth. I thought I was doing the right thing, he admitted finally. I wanted to shield you from disappointment, from failure, from people who wouldn't understand you. I felt my chest tighten, the anger colliding with a strange, unexpected current of empathy. So you chose my brother as the success because he was easier, my father said, almost inaudible. He fit the mold. He could take the applause without question. You You questioned everything. You challenged me, challenged the world, and I didn't know how to handle it. The words cut deeper than I expected. I had always blamed myself, wondered if my own personality, my own drive, had been the reason I was sidelined. And now, hearing it from him, it wasn't about me at all. It was about his inability to accept me as I was. I sank against the wall, exhausted, the revelation leaving me trembling. All these years, I whispered, all these years of feeling invisible. And it wasn't because I wasn't enough, it was because you couldn't accept me. He nodded, his expression almost sorrowful. Yes, and I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't make up for the hurt. But it's the truth. I closed my eyes, the weight of decades pressing down. Truth doesn't erase the pain, I said quietly. It doesn't erase the parties I sat through, the toasts I endured, the smiles I forced when all I wanted to do was disappear. He was silent, and I felt something shift, a delicate balance of understanding forming between us, fragile but undeniable. You have to know, he said finally, that I have regrets, more than you'll ever realize. But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to do better now. Try to do. I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. The vulnerability he had never allowed me to witness before. And in that moment, something inside me softened. Not completely, not yet, but enough to consider the possibility that perhaps family wasn't only defined by neglect or favoritism, perhaps it could be redefined, rebuilt if both sides were willing. But before I could respond, the corridor door opened abruptly behind us. A figure emerged from the shadows, my brother. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. He looked between us, and I realized that he had been listening, that he had heard more than he should have. "Everything okay here?" he asked, voice calm but edged with something I couldn't place. I straightened, anger and exhaustion mixing. "Everything's fine," I said, though the lie felt brittle on my tongue. My father gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent warning, but I ignored it. "No," I said firmly. "Nothing is fine. Not for me, not for anyone who's ever been made invisible in this family. And it's time someone said it." My brother's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise passing across his face. He wasn't used to confrontation from me, not like this. "What are you talking about?" he asked cautiously. I took a deep breath, letting the anger and hurt that had accumulated over decades surge to the surface. "I'm talking about the fact that for years I've existed in the shadows while you were celebrated. I'm talking about the fact that my successes were ignored, my voice silenced, and my worth measured only by how well I fit into your carefully curated story. I'm talking about the toast tonight and every toast before it where my existence was irrelevant, invisible, dismissed." He opened his mouth, but I pressed on. "Do you have any idea what that feels like? To watch everyone you love celebrate someone else while you're just a ghost in the room? That's what family has felt like for me. And it ends now." For a long moment, silence hung like a thick curtain. Then, surprisingly, my brother stepped closer, lowering his gaze. I I didn't know," he admitted quietly. I thought I thought you were fine. I thought you didn't care about that stuff." I felt the sting of frustration flare. "I've been fine because I had no choice. I've been invisible because speaking up never mattered. But I'm not invisible anymore, and I won't be." He hesitated, then finally spoke again, more quietly, almost as if confessing a secret. I I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." I studied him, saw the genuine confusion, the hint of regret, and I realized that perhaps this wasn't about blame alone, but about patterns that had been passed down, unexamined, unchallenged. Perhaps the first step wasn't punishment or revenge, it was acknowledgement. "You can start by noticing me," I said simply. "By seeing me, really seeing me, instead of assuming I don't matter." He nodded slowly, a gesture small, almost imperceptible, but monumental in its significance. My father exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift in the family dynamic. Not healed, not forgiven, but opening, stretching toward the possibility of something better. We stood there for a moment, the three of us in a fragile truce, the noise of the party muted behind the walls. I realized that the night had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had started as another evening of invisibility had become a turning point, a confrontation with truths long ignored. And yet I sensed that this was only the beginning. The cracks in the family facade had been revealed, and there were more shadows to explore, more secrets waiting to surface. The night had changed. What had begun as another engagement celebration had become something unrecognizable, an intricate web of unspoken truths and simmering tensions stretching out beneath the glittering surface of the party. I returned to the main hall with a strange sense of purpose, my father and brother trailing behind me in an uneasy silence. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it felt surreal, like a theater I had wandered into unprepared, now seeing behind the scenes. As I walked, I couldn't help but notice the subtle dynamics around the room, the details I had overlooked before. The way my parents' friends leaned a little too eagerly toward my brother, seeking approval. The whispered glances exchanged when my name was mentioned. The polite smiles that hid undercurrents of judgment. It was like watching a well-rehearsed play, everyone performing, and I was suddenly seeing the script they'd been following all my life. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, my brother's fiancée. moving through the crowd with a grace that made it clear she belonged nowhere near the chaos she was navigating. But there was a sharpness to her gaze tonight, a clarity I hadn't noticed before, as if she had spotted something others were too polite to acknowledge. And when her eyes met mine, there was that same spark of understanding, that quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, we were both seeing the truth behind the facades. I moved toward her, curiosity mixed with a cautious hope. "What's going on?" I asked, voice low so only she could hear. She glanced around the room, ensuring we weren't overheard, then leaned closer. "There are things happening tonight you don't yet understand," she said softly, her tone deliberate. "Things your parents have kept hidden. I've noticed it for a while. The way they manipulate perception, the way they control narratives. But tonight you're seeing it too." My stomach tightened. "Manipulate perception? Control narratives?" I repeated, uncertain if I wanted the answer. "What are you talking about?" Her expression hardened. "I'm talking about the way they've written your life, edited your story so you would never feel like you mattered. And I'm talking about the secrets they're keeping, secrets that could change everything you think you know about this family." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to laugh at the dramatic tone, to brush it off as paranoia, but another part, an instinct buried deep from years of intuition, told me she was telling the truth. She had been paying attention. She had seen the cracks I was only beginning to notice. "Show me," I said finally, almost a whisper. "Show me everything." She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes flicking toward the buffet, toward the throng of oblivious guests. "Follow me," she said, slipping through the crowd with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this escape in her mind. We wound our way to a service corridor behind the main hall, narrow and dimly lit, the hum of the party muted into distant echoes. She stopped at a heavy wooden door, slightly ajar, and gestured for me to peer inside. The room beyond was small and cluttered, stacked with boxes and old furniture, but what caught my attention wasn't the storage. It was the people. My father and brother were there, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with a man I didn't recognize, someone I had never seen at family gatherings. His presence alone was unsettling, a reminder that the party, the celebration, the smiles, was all a performance for someone else's benefit. I strained to hear. "It's not enough," the man said, voice low and precise. "The public doesn't see it. They only see the toast, the smiles, the perfection. You need more. Something undeniable." My father's hand twitched nervously. "We've done everything we can," he replied, his tone tight. "We've controlled the narrative, hidden the failures, elevated him." His eyes flicked toward my brother, who looked equally tense. "But it's not enough. She might figure it out." "She won't," the man said smoothly, a predator in a tailored suit. "No one sees what we don't want them to see, except maybe him." His gaze shifted subtly, and I realized he meant me. My pulse surged, a cold wave of fear mixed with anger. I had stumbled onto something far bigger than hurt feelings or favoritism. I had stumbled onto a secret my family had been hiding, carefully, meticulously, for years. I stepped back, heart hammering. "What? What are they planning?" I whispered to my companion, my voice shaking. She didn't answer immediately. Her jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. "That man isn't just any guest," she said finally. "He's someone your parents brought in to manage situations, to protect their image, to manipulate the story, make sure nothing threatens the narrative they've built around your brother. And until tonight, they believed you were compliant, quiet, invisible." I felt my stomach drop. Invisible. Always invisible until I wasn't. And now that I was here, listening, witnessing, I was part of a story I had never been allowed to be in control of. Before I could react further, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The sound was small, insignificant. But in that quiet room, it was catastrophic. All three heads turned in unison toward the door, and my father's eyes widened, a flicker of panic flashing across his face. I froze, caught between fear and fury, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then my brother stepped forward, surprisingly calm. "We have company," he said, his voice low, almost amused. My father's face went pale. "Go back," he hissed, stepping toward me. "You weren't supposed to see this. You don't understand." I understand more than you think. I cut in sharply. I understand that you've been building a fortress around your perfect image, controlling every perception, every story. I understand that I've been left out because I didn't fit, and I understand now that I can't be ignored anymore. The man in the suit shifted, a faint smile curling his lips. Interesting, he said, voice smooth but cold. You weren't supposed to be aware of this yet, but now that you are, choices must be made. Choices. The word hung in the air, charged with a menace that I had never experienced before. I realized then that my presence here was no longer passive. I was a threat, whether I wanted to be or not. And the room, small, claustrophobic, felt like the epicenter of a storm I could neither predict nor escape. My brother's fiancée stepped beside me, her hand brushing mine in a subtle, grounding gesture. Stay calm, she whispered. We can get through this, but you have to trust me. Trust. Another word, another challenge. But there was something in her eyes, a certainty that made me believe, however faintly, that I wasn't entirely alone. My father's hands trembled, betraying the facade of control. You don't understand what's at stake, he said finally, voice barely audible. Everything we've built, all of it, gone, if anyone finds out. Gone. And what about me? I asked, my voice rising with urgency. What about all the years I've spent invisible? All the moments I've been erased? Where does that fit into your precious narrative? He flinched but said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with implication. The man in the suit leaned forward slightly, his gaze appraising, calculating. He's dangerous, he said finally, meaning me. He sees too much. I felt a flicker of fear, but also a surge of clarity. Then it's a good thing I'm done being invisible, I said quietly, but with unshakable resolve. Because you can't control me anymore. You can't erase me, and you can't dictate how I interpret your lies. My brother looked at me, eyes wide, the first real flicker of uncertainty I had seen in him all night. My father's jaw tightened, a storm of emotions warring behind his eyes. Fear, anger, desperation. And the man in the suit. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who knew this game had just become more dangerous than he had anticipated. Then, without warning, the lights in the corridor flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The sudden blackness was disorienting, sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. I could hear movement, faint whispers, a scuffle that made my pulse spike. Stay close, my companion whispered, her hand gripping mine firmly. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I nodded, though my heart was racing, adrenaline coursing through every nerve. I realized then that tonight wasn't just about a toast, or a party, or even invisible childhood wounds. Tonight was about survival, of truth, of identity, of finally claiming a space in a world that had tried to erase me. And as the shadows shifted, as the unknown pressed in from every side, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind my family wielded over perception and control, but a quiet, unshakable power that came from being seen, from refusing to be silent, from stepping into the storm instead of hiding from it. Whatever secrets they had, whatever manipulations they had set in motion, I was no longer invisible. And that was going to change everything. The darkness in the corridor pressed in, thick and suffocating, but I moved forward, guided by the faint light from the hall that leaked through the cracks in the doors. My brother's fiancée stayed close, her hand still gripping mine, grounding me even as fear and adrenaline surged. Every step was deliberate, cautious, as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting to punish us for intruding on secrets meant to remain buried. I could hear whispers, indistinct but urgent, bouncing off the concrete and plaster. The man in the suit and my father were speaking, their voices low, tense. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone alone was enough. Strategizing, planning, a quiet storm of deceit and control that had been orchestrated for years. And at the center of it all, as I realized with a bitter twist, was my brother, still blissfully unaware, or perhaps too comfortable in his role to question the machinery surrounding him. The faint glow from the service stairwell caught my eye, and I moved toward it. My companion whispered, that way. There's a back exit. But we need to be careful. If they notice, everything changes. I nodded, my heart pounding, every sense heightened. My mind raced, reviewing years of invisibility, of being sidelined, of feeling like my existence was only acknowledged when it served someone else's narrative. And now, standing at the edge of revelation, I realized that this night, this engagement party, this hall of polished smiles and empty toasts was the culmination of all that pain. And finally, I had a choice. We slipped down the narrow stairwell, the hum of the party growing distant with every step. The walls were close, the air heavy, smelling faintly of dust and old wood. It felt surreal, like stepping into a place that existed beneath the polished veneer of my family's life, a hidden skeleton of truths I had never been permitted to see. Then we reached a door, small, unassuming, with a metal handle that creaked ominously as I pushed it open. The night air hit me like a cold wave, sharp and bracing. I could see the city stretched out below, its lights shimmering like distant stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding in one small corner of it. I exhaled, a shiver running down my spine. For the first time, I felt a strange clarity, terrifying, exhilarating, liberating. But that clarity was short-lived. Behind us, a shadow moved in the stairwell. A figure blocked the exit, tall, broad, and unmistakably deliberate. My father stepped forward, his face pale but controlled. "You weren't supposed to leave," he said, voice steady but edged with warning. I faced him, the adrenaline still surging, my voice firm. "And I wasn't supposed to see what you've been hiding, but I did, and I won't let it control me anymore." The man in the suit emerged next, a predator's smile curling across his lips. "You have no idea what you've just stumbled into," he said. "Your parents, your brother, they've been careful. Everything has been orchestrated to maintain the narrative, and now you could ruin it." I felt a chill, but also a strange thrill. I had lived my life feeling invisible, powerless, disregarded. But now I had agency. Now I could act, not as a child waiting for recognition, but as someone who had finally seen the full extent of the deception. "Maybe," I said slowly, deliberately, "but maybe it's time someone told the truth." My father's jaw tightened, my brother's eyes widened, and the man in the suit's smile faltered just slightly. The tension in the stairwell was palpable, a taut wire ready to snap. Then, unexpectedly, my brother stepped forward, his own voice uncertain but present. "Wait," he said. I I don't think you understand." I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. Not fear of me, but fear of truth. He had been shielded, pampered, elevated, and yet he was as much a prisoner as I had been, caught in a system of manipulation that none of us had fully comprehended. "You think this is about me?" I asked quietly. "It's never been just about me. It's about control, about appearances, about maintaining a version of reality that serves one narrative and one narrative only. And tonight, that narrative falls apart." My father's hands shook, subtle but noticeable, and the man in the suit moved slightly closer, as if to reassert dominance. "This is reckless," he said, voice smooth but with a sharp edge. "You don't understand the consequences." "Then explain them," I challenged. "Explain why all my life I've been told I'm less than, why all my successes were invisible. Explain why tonight, at this celebration, the only acknowledgement I received was for being a shadow. Explain it." There was a silence, thick and suffocating. I could feel every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every subtle shift in the air. And then my father spoke, the words slow, deliberate, as if weighing each one carefully. "You weren't supposed to know, but you've always been part of the plan, just not in the way you think." I froze. Part of me expected another lie, another carefully constructed excuse. But then he took a deep breath, and what he said next sent a chill down my spine. "There was a reason we focused on him," he said, voice low. "Not because he was the only success, not because he deserved it more, but because you were dangerous. Not in the way you think, not because of anything you did wrong, but because you saw too clearly. You asked too many questions. You challenged too many assumptions. And if we had let you take the spotlight, if we had let you exist fully in that world, it would have unraveled everything we built. The room felt impossibly still. My mind raced. Unraveled everything? So all the years of being invisible, all the hurt, all the pain, it was because I threatened your control? Yes, he said, almost whispering. Not intentionally cruel, but necessary. We thought we were protecting the family, protecting everyone. I laughed bitter and it echoed in the stairwell. Protecting everyone? You destroyed me in the process. You made me doubt myself, made me feel worthless, erased my life. And for what? So you could preserve an image? He said nothing. The man in the suit surprisingly looked uneasy. My brother's face, too, was pale, eyes wide. The first real crack in the perfect mask I had always seen. And then it happened. A sudden, sharp realization. This wasn't just about control or favoritism, or even the family's obsession with appearances. There was something deeper, darker, a pattern of manipulation that went beyond even what I had imagined. I looked at my brother's fiancée, her eyes reflecting what I now understood. The truth was worse than any lie we had been told. You've all been lying, I said finally, voice shaking with a mixture of rage and clarity. Not just to me, to each other, to yourselves. My father flinched. No. Yes, I interrupted. And it ends tonight. I won't be invisible anymore. I won't allow lies to define my life, my worth, or my future. There was a long pause. Then, surprisingly, my brother stepped forward, his hand slightly trembling. You're right, he said. I didn't see it before. I thought I understood, but I was just complicit. I want to change that. If you're willing to see me as your brother, not just the successful one, I want to start over. For the first time that night, I felt something fragile but undeniable. Hope. The idea that family could be something more than betrayal, more than invisibility, that it could be rebuilt if we were willing to confront the darkness, to see the truth, to face the consequences. And then my father sighed, a long, shuddering release of tension. Perhaps, he said, it's time we face the truth. All of it. No more illusions. It was a beginning, though not an ending. Not an... The night had revealed everything, secrets, betrayals, manipulations, but it had also shown the possibility of reconciliation, of acknowledgement, of genuine recognition. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer silent. And for the first time, I understood that strength was not measured by applause or recognition from others, but by the courage to see clearly, to speak truth, and to claim your place in the world, regardless of who else decided you didn't belong. As the first hints of dawn brushed the city skyline with pale light, I stood there with my brother and his fiancée, my father slowly joining us, the night's revelations heavy in the air. I realized that family, blood or otherwise, is never simple. It is messy, complicated, sometimes cruel, but also capable of transformation, of recognition, of unexpected loyalty. And I knew finally that I would never again allow my existence to be defined by someone else's version of success. I looked out at the city, the lights twinkling like distant promises, and felt a quiet clarity. This night, this storm of truths and confrontations had changed everything. And I asked myself, and anyone listening, how many times have we accepted invisibility, tolerated betrayal, or hidden our true selves to appease others? How many moments have we allowed someone else's narrative to define our worth? And finally, who in our lives truly sees us? Not the surface, not the performance, but the person beneath. And who do we need to confront or forgive to reclaim our own story? Because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that illuminate not only the darkness in others, but the power and resilience we carry within ourselves.